chaos and order in monetary matters, that's our topic of the day. Something absolutely unprecedented shakes the economy between the second half of the 16th century and the first half of the 17th century. There, we cross the very fine line between the order and chaos. Only Germany spiraled out into hyperinflation, largely due to the currency substitution dynamics. The famous author Ernest Hemingway witnessed it firsthand and wrote, Hugo Stinnes, the famous German industrialist, he successfully capitalized on hyperinflation by borrowing vast sums of money, repaying them later with much devaluated currency, the Dutch guilder and the British shilling. And each of one tell us the same story of successive economic dominance and decline of superpowers. Time will tell if humankind embarks on yet another fiat system managed by a fallible institution, or if instead we choose to place our confidence in Bitcoin. Hello everyone. Today I'm taking you on a journey through monetary history to explore how the delicate balance between order and chaos affects economies. Chaos and order in monetary matters, that's our topic of the day. Why do we oscillate between these states? What is the threshold and the catalyst that precipitate us from one state to another? That's what we're going to look at today. First of all, money isn't just a government construct. It can be a spontaneous and emergent phenomenon arising from the need of society. And let that be clear, any attempt to impose strict control over economies by adding excessive order to the natural chaos or trying to meddle with money supply generally result in unintended consequences, leading to even more chaos. Let's illustrate this with a period of history called the Age of Discovery. By and large, prices have remained quite stable throughout the history when expressed in gold. In this outstanding book, Broken Money, Lynn Alden reminds us that gold has had an inflation rate of about 1.5% per year. Historically, such a rate matched the population growth and productivity increases. In other words, during most part of history, and more specifically from 15th century to the second half of the 16th century, population growth and productivity gains compensated for the small increase in the supply of gold. In short, prices were stable in gold. Interesting, right? Now, to fully grasp what's happening here, let's recall Milton Friedman's famous quotes. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. But what does this mean? Well, it's simple. Any significant growth in the money supply, gold or banknotes, eventually lead to price increases. Keep that in mind. Something absolutely unprecedented shakes the economy between the second half of the 16th century and the first half of the 17th century. The large influx of gold and silver from the Spanish treasure fleet from the New World flows through Spain, inflating the money supply, and prices shoot up throughout Europe. This sudden and violent price inflation, a mere 1.2%, was named the Spanish Price Revolution. How mind-bending it is to realize how accustomed we have become to a chronic, policy-driven regime of much higher inflation. The emergent order and price stability granted by gold scarcity of the beginning of the 15th century was disrupted by a massive influx of precious metal looted by the Spaniards in America. There, we cross the very fine line between the order and chaos. To illustrate this period, straight from my collection, here's a Spanish dollar, also called a piece of 8. Hyperinflation is rather a scary word that describes a period of total economic chaos, a state where inflation spirals out of control. It's happening all the time, the economies experiencing it are in shambles and people suffer. But is it amazing? The line between the relatively orderly state of moderate inflation and the total chaos of hyperinflation is actually really thin. Think of it as a virtual boundary which is crossed when a currency loses so much value that people start substituting it with another currency. This is called currency substitution. In more technical terms, economist Peter Bernholz note that from the empirical evidence, it seems that differences in rates of inflation of two currencies of 10 to 20% per annum are not sufficient to engender more than a negligible currency substitution. In other words, two currencies can withstand up to a 20% difference in inflation rates without significant currency substitution. But, lo and behold, beyond that threshold, the risk increases dramatically, potentially leading to hyperinflation. What does hyperinflation even looks like, you wonder? Well, check the devastating example of the German Weimar Republic after World War I. During the war period, both Germany and France experienced high inflation. However, only Germany spiraled out into hyperinflation, largely due to the currency substitution dynamics. The famous author Ernest Hemingway witnessed it firsthand and wrote, "For 10 francs I received 670 marks. 10 francs amounted to about 90 cents in Canadian money. That 90 cents lasted for a day of heavy spending, and at the end of the day, we still had 120 marks left." Whilst in Germany, Hemingway does enjoy a whole day of heavy spending for the equivalence of 90 cents, and he still had some marks left in his pocket. Do you realize the damage? How fast the marks was devaluating? Absolutely unbearable for the German population. But actually, was it totally unmanageable? Interestingly, a range of strategies have been designed to navigate chaos. Both individuals and institutions have come up with solutions to maneuver in such turbulent times. Just take a look. Check my Notgelds. It's a type of emergency money issued in France and Germany during that era. What happened during the Great War is that inflation led people to hoard coins for their precious metal contents. Metal coins were getting too scarce for a merchant to conduct small transactions. This is what led to the creation of these emergency notes. Also, chaos isn't bad for everyone. Smart individuals and businesses spot great opportunities in such crises and profit immensely during turbulent times. Take Hugo Stinnes, the famous German industrialist. He successfully capitalized on hyperinflation by borrowing vast sums of money, repaying them later with much devaluated currency. An account from that time states, "An appreciation of the mark was greatly feared. Industrial circles were faced with the danger that cash could become more valuable than goods, and of a crash when everyone attempted to convert their asset back into money again." As surprising as it may sound, industrialists at the time were terrified by the prospect of stabilization or even the appreciation of the mark decimating their cash cow. To illustrate this situation, here's a banknote from my collection of 5 trillion marks. So think about it now. Can't you spot some current instances where investors leverage economic instability for gain? Weimar was certainly an extreme period, but aren't you aware of bold entrepreneurs replicating Hugo Stinnes' playbook? Are not the Bitcoiner Michael Saylor frantically leveraging cheap credit to acquire the hardest assets ever? Alright, let's turn our attention to the very fine line that separates a successful monetary reform, which brings back order and stability, from a disastrous one, which precipitates further disorder and chaos. It all revolves around one fundamental factor: public confidence. Check what Peter Bernholz has to say about it. A change of monetary regime with the purpose of ending an hyperinflation at one stroke presupposes that market participants and the general public can form a correct judgment on whether the reforms taken are adequate or not. The general public and even more sophisticated market participants are, however, only knowledgeable in a rather limited way concerning the relevant relationships. Mostly, they even lack the education necessary to form an adequate judgment. As a consequence, it may happen that they either distrust reform which should prove successful, or, on the other hand, believe in the future success of inadequate measures. Long story short, if people don't trust the reforms, even the best policies can fail. Conversely, and as crazy as it may sound, Misplaced trust in inadequate measures can sometimes bring stability. Trust remains the most important ingredient for a successful monetary reform. Let's step back now and discover what my collection of coins reveal. Each of these coins belong to a former world reserve currency. We have the Spanish dollar, the Dutch guilder, and the British shilling. And each of one tell us the same story of successive economic dominance and decline of superpowers. The vigorous spring and summer of a new rising order preceding a chaotic fall and winter paving the way for a new order. The decline of hegemonic superpowers often coincides with the mismanagement and devaluation of their currency, and the cycle goes on with a clockwork regularity. Witness the loss of purchasing power of the US dollar. The wheel is turning, and here we are again facing turbulent times. And make no mistake, bringing back monetary stability and sound economic growth will again hinge on a renewed public confidence. Time will tell if humankind embarks on yet another fiat system managed by a fallible institution, or if instead we choose to place our confidence in Bitcoin, this mathematically sound and incorruptible monetary system.